Meanwhile, South Sudan's government says it will hold elections before the end of the year with or without a peace deal with the opposition. The international community has been urging the country to revitalize the 2015 pact, and another round of peace talks is due to take place in Addis Ababa later this month. It could be one of the final opportunities to secure lasting peace in the war-torn country. CGTN's Patrick Oyet has more from Juba.
Juba accuses opposition groups of being intransigent and says the U.S. sanctions and threats of sanctions by other countries and members of the international community are causing those opposition groups to make demands that cannot bring peace back to South Sudan. Juba particularly accuses the opposition of planning to create further chaos in South Sudan by insisting that the current executive, Parliament and the security sector be dissolved upon signing the peace deal. The opposition groups say they simply need a new beginning for South Sudan. Juba insists it will go ahead with elections if no agreement is reached with opposition groups by July this year.
The government is ready to go for talks at any time. We should not also dismiss the idea of us going for elections, because after all there is still enough time. And if necessity requires, then we will be going for elections. We talk of going for elections when we see that the opposition is not serious and they are dragging their feet with the plan that there would appear a vacuum.
The current unity government is formed as a result of the 2015 peace deal. That peace agreement comes to an end in October this year. The problem for South Sudan's government is that if the current agreement expires and there is no new agreement with the opposition groups, then there would be a power vacuum where there is no elected government and there is no legal ground for the current government to continue. The international community is, however, saying the unity government should prioritize the peace process over elections. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
Now, to discuss the current situation in South Sudan, we're joined in studio by Michael Arunga. He's an expert on South Sudan affairs. Michael, thank you very much for joining us. So we've had President Kiir saying there will be no negotiations until all parties denounce violence. But now we have his former army chief coming up with his own political movement and calling, saying President Kiir has looted the country. What's your reading of this situation? What's the problem there?
I think the sincerity of the leaders is the key issue. If they were sincere in their solving of the issues that are facing South Sudan, then they would be able to sort out the issues. Three things. One is tribal, affiliations, and then the second thing is, political and economic kinds of, attachments. So the leaders are reaching out in terms of trying to have control of these areas, more power, and in isolation of the people that are really affected. So Paul Malong talks about forming a party, but then he's rarely within South Sudan. He's a former close ally, as you've said, with the homes here in Nairobi. His family here, his daughter died at Moi Nairobi Girls in the Fire, and then he was detained and not released. So the sincerity of him reaching out and talking about democracy and trying to be able to further, I'm not really thinking that is a genuine approach in terms of sorting out issues.
Right.
Yeah.
And then now there's this upcoming election, at least according to the president, saying with or without a peace deal with the opposition, there will be an election before the end of the year. Question is, though, can there be a credible vote in such an environment?
No. We need to set up structures. They need to sort out the problems that they are facing. They need to address the causative factors, strong issues that have led to the conflict, which boil back to the leaders. If they sort that out, then we start talking about elections. But without this, I don't see them sorting out. I see a lot of conflict, a lot of tension.
What's the rush here, though? What's the rush? One wonders. What's the rush for having an election?
I think, as I've shared, being driven by selfish interests and not being genuine in terms of sorting out the issues at the grassroots, because when you look at it from the perspective of the people that are affected, then it becomes a very, very sad affair. Then you need to have selfless leaders who are really genuine about sorting out, because we've had peace agreements signed, witnessed by presidents, witnessed by the United Nations, and then they are not sorted out, they are not followed through. Right. And that is something that needs to be addressed. Yeah.
And then we have the question of the peacekeeping missions that have been there in South Sudan since 2011. We're speaking about 7 years now. It doesn't seem to be, there doesn't seem to be tangible results out of these peacekeeping missions. What is it they're doing wrong, or what should they do? What's the problem?
I've shared that the issue of the peacekeepers, the mandate needs to be revisited. As opposed to it being a peacekeeping force, it needs to enforce the peace, because I've been to South Sudan, seen this group. Some of them are child soldiers who don't understand what they're fighting about. So they need to move in, stop this, put a stop to this, because some of them are racked up kinds of, forces that don't have the military might. And if there was genuineness by the United Nations in terms of sorting this out, I think that would be achieved.
Michael, what about the IGAD itself? Because, like you mentioned, we've got people like Paul Malong who've settled here in Kenya. How serious is IGAD about making sure there is peace in South Sudan?
I think when you look at IGAD, formed different states who have interests depending on what they are trying to reach out, the whole issue of the economic kind of benefits that they'll be able to draw out, and that drives a selfish agenda in trying to sort this out. But then if there's sincerity in terms to put this into perspective, then I think it can be sorted out. And the IGAD, in terms of sincerity, have followed the discussions. They have come to the table. There's
been talk of sanctions.
Yes, sanctions which have been sometimes enforced. Salva Kiir following up in terms of pushing this agenda. We've had Riek Machar in South Africa. Yeah, those are sanctions. But then the sincerity in terms of ensuring that this is actually sorted out, I think is still not there the way that we require.
All right. Yeah. We appreciate those insights, Michael. Thank you. A delight as always speaking to you.
Thanks.
We had here in studio Michael Arunga.